Hidden somewhere within the Carolina Low Country, beneath stacks of family Bibles and letters long since destroyed, rests proof of a bargain that defied both divine law and human decency. A woman, unable to bear children, discovered a solution that the planter elite might have praised as clever, yet history would later condemn as horrifying. For 12 years, a child grew up in an elegant home along the Ashley River, unaware that the woman who nurtured him had no biological connection to him whatsoever. The truth lay in full view, shielded by a carefully woven network of silence that stretched from the drawing room to the slave quarters, sustained through intimidation and the shared understanding that some secrets must never be spoken. What could compel a well-regarded Charleston lady to orchestrate such a deception? The answer survives only in letters that were never supposed to remain, in testimonies whispered decades later, and in a revelation that shattered one of South Carolina's most distinguished families. Before we delve further into the account of the Rutled Plantation and the woman who constructed her legacy upon a lie, make sure to subscribe to the Whispered Histories and enable notifications so you never miss one of our darkest historical mysteries. And while you're here, let us know in the comments which city or state you're listening from. We always love discovering where our community of history enthusiasts is watching. Now, let us trace the truth of what unfolded along the Ashley River in the turbulent years before the Civil War. The Rutled Plantation stretched across 3,000 acres of fertile Carolina lowland, its fields yielding some of the finest Sea Island cotton to reach the Charleston market. At the end of a long, oak-shaded drive stood the main residence, a white-columned monument to the wealth accrued over 3 generations. In 1843, this estate belonged to 7-year-old Nathaniel Rutled and his wife Catherine, age 32, a couple whose marriage had become the subject of increasingly uneasy gossip in Charleston society. Nathaniel had inherited the plantation in 1838 following his father's death, along with the forced labor of 143 enslaved individuals whose economic value surpassed the land itself. He was regarded as a forward-thinking planter, one who studied agricultural journals and experimented with new cultivation techniques. His treatment of the enslaved was considered reasonable by his peers, which is to say he viewed them not as human beings, but as valuable work animals, assets whose health and output needed to be preserved for financial gain rather than out of compassion. Catherine, meanwhile, came from the respected Hammond family of Savannah, whose wealth was rooted in rice and naval supplies. Her marriage to Nathaniel in 1836 brought a dowry of $20,000, along with the expectation that she would quickly produce heirs to secure the family's future. Yet, 7 years passed with no pregnancy, and in a society where a woman's worth was measured largely by her ability to bear children, Catherine's standing weakened with each passing season. Physicians in Charleston, Savannah, and even Philadelphia had been consulted. Catherine endured treatments ranging from unpleasant to outright dangerous mercury mixtures, lead tonics, bloodletting, and invasive procedures that left her bedridden for days. None of it succeeded. The diagnosis, delivered with the cold certainty common among doctors of the time, was that Catherine's womb could not sustain life. In plain terms, she would never bear a child. For Nathaniel, this created both social and practical concerns. Without legitimate heirs, the estate would eventually pass to his younger brother's children, an outcome he found unacceptable. For Catherine, the consequences were even more devastating. A barren wife could be cast aside, her dowry returned to her family, and her life reduced to quiet humiliation among the very elite who once praised her beauty and charm. It was Catherine who devised the solution, though she would later insist that the idea had come to her in a divinely inspired dream. The spring of 1844 brought an unusually stifling heat to the region, the sort that made even thin garments cling heavily to the skin. Catherine spent her days on the second-floor veranda, catching the faint breeze rolling off the river. From there, she surveyed the entirety of the plantation, the cotton fields stretching toward the horizon, the rows of whitewashed slave cabins, and the brick structures housing the cotton press and carpentry workshop. And from that vantage point, a plan began to take form, one that would reshape every life on the property. From her perch on the veranda, Catherine began to observe the enslaved women in her household with an intensity she had never shown before. She scrutinized their ages, physiques, and distinct features, cataloging each in her mind. One girl, in particular, captured her attention. Delilah, brought to the main house 2 years prior to train as a lady's maid. Delilah, 22, was the daughter of the plantation's most skilled cooper, who had passed away from fever 5 years earlier. She was literate, educated by a former owner whose generous inclinations had drawn the ire of neighbors, and possessed what the family deemed refined features. Most notably, her light complexion, a result of generations of enforced mixing, allowed her to appear white under the right conditions and clothing. Catherine began treating Delilah with extraordinary care. She remained close to her, personally instructing her in the intricate tasks of a lady's maid, dressing hair, choosing garments, managing correspondence. She addressed her in tones that unsettled the other house slaves, almost speaking to her as an equal in private moments. Gradually, Catherine began probing into Delilah's health, menstrual cycles, and family history, questions that made the young woman deeply uneasy, though she dared not refuse to answer. By summer, Catherine's plan had solidified. Nathaniel would father a child with Delilah, and Catherine would claim it as her own. While the practice of enslaved women bearing their masters' children was tragically common, this scheme went far beyond the casual exploitation typical of plantation life. Catherine intended to present the child as white and raise it publicly as the rightful heir to the Rutled fortune. The logistics were intricate, but Catherine was meticulous by nature. She began feigning mysterious ailments, requiring solitude and rest. She commissioned a small cottage at the edge of the property, claiming it as a private retreat for recovery. Older house slaves were sent away, replaced with younger women more easily managed through a combination of fear and promises. On a sweltering August evening, Catherine disclosed her plan to Nathaniel in his study. A room lined with law books and agricultural journals, illuminated by the soft glow of whale oil lamps. Carefully rehearsing her words, she framed the arrangement not as a moral failing, but as a practical solution to an otherwise insurmountable problem. She painted vivid images of the consequences of childlessness, the estate passing to his brother's offspring, all that he had worked to cultivate slipping away. She appealed to his pride, vanity, and belief that he deserved to establish a lasting dynasty. Nathaniel reacted first with shock, then disgust, then a reluctant fascination. He immediately grasped the plan and its implications. Moral considerations troubled him less than the practical challenges. How could society be convinced Catherine had given birth when so many knew she had not? How could they guarantee silence among those who would eventually discover the truth? Catherine anticipated every objection. They would simulate a pregnancy with padded clothing, excuse Catherine's seclusion, and stage the birth in the cottage attended only by those they could control. Months later, they would re-emerge into Charleston society with a healthy infant whose features would allow no suspicion. Catherine had also considered how to maintain secrecy. The enslaved, powerless by circumstance, could not safely reveal the truth. Any white confidant would be bound by social codes protecting the planter class. The child itself would remain unaware, believing Catherine his mother and Nathaniel his father. The discussion continued until dawn. By sunrise over the Ashley River, Nathaniel had agreed to every detail, and execution began that very week. Catherine announced to the household that the Philadelphia physician's treatments had succeeded once more. She dramatized her delicate condition, retiring early from dinners, canceling social engagements, and spending long hours in her chamber with only Delilah present. Delilah was relocated to a small room adjacent to Catherine's suite, always accessible but isolated from other slaves. She was informed that she would carry a child for the mistress, that it was a great honor, and that obedience would bring rewards for her and her father. The alternative was unspoken but palpable, hanging over her like a storm cloud. In the months that followed, Catherine enacted a grotesque pantomime of pregnancy. She padded her dresses to simulate a growing abdomen, while Delilah, carrying the actual child, was confined to the main house. Delilah's exposure to the outside world was strictly limited, and she was fed a rich diet to sustain her health and that of the unborn child, while Catherine preserved her own figure with tight corseting beneath the padding. Nathaniel carried out his role with grim efficiency, visiting Delilah on 3 consecutive nights in September until Catherine deemed it sufficient. Beyond the physical act, he spoke little and acknowledged nothing. To admit the reality would confront the full horror of the arrangement, a confrontation he had spent his life avoiding. By December, Delilah's pregnancy was unmistakable, yet Catherine ensured only a tightly controlled circle witnessed it. Meals were delivered by young house slaves, chosen for their fear and obedience, girls so terrified for themselves or their families that silence was their only option. That winter, Catherine made a solitary trip to Charleston, attending her cousin's dinner with the conspicuous curve of her padded belly beneath a costly silk gown. She endured the well-meaning advice and congratulations of society matrons who had long praised her elegance, performing her role with the precision and poise of a practiced actress. She spoke of the minor discomforts of pregnancy in tones that hinted at secret delight, suggesting that such sufferings were a small price to pay for impending motherhood. No one suspected that the child she seemed to carry was actually growing in the womb of a slave woman locked away miles from the main house. As spring brought its familiar heat and swarms of insects, Catherine retreated to the cottage she had commissioned, taking Delilah with her while dismissing the usual household staff under vague claims that she required absolute rest during her final weeks. The cottage's windows were shielded with heavy drapes to prevent prying eyes, and only 3 people attended it. Catherine herself, an elderly enslaved midwife named Patience, and Delilah. The birth occurred on a Friday in late April, amid a fierce thunderstorm, rain pounding relentlessly on the roof. Delilah labored for 14 grueling hours, her cries muffled by the thunder and distance from the main house, while Catherine paced the small parlor, occasionally checking the bedroom door for progress. When the child finally arrived, a healthy, robust boy, Catherine acted with swift precision. Patients cleaned and wrapped him before Delilah could even hold him. She was given laudanum for the pain and told to rest, her body still heavy with milk meant that for a child she would never nurse. Catherine carried the infant to the main house, staging an elaborate display of exhaustion and triumph. Nathaniel was summoned to behold his newborn son. Servants were called to witness, and messages were sent to Charleston announcing the arrival of William Nathaniel Rutled, heir to one of the Low Country's most prestigious estates. The baby, with fair skin and delicate, undefined features typical of newborns, perfectly fit Catherine's design. Visitors offered their congratulations in the weeks that followed, seeing nothing to contradict the story of the child as the legitimate offspring of a respected planter and his wife. Delilah remained in the cottage for 6 weeks, recovering in isolation. Her breasts, painfully engorged with milk meant for a child she would never feed, gradually drying up as her body adjusted to loss. Upon returning to the main house, her role shifted entirely, now serving as wet nurse to her own son, yet presented, publicly, as merely another slave tasked with feeding the master's child. This arrangement lasted only 3 months before Catherine, fearing the bond might endanger the deception, replaced her with a wet nurse from a neighboring plantation, unaware of William's origins. Delilah was then assigned to labor in the cotton fields, entirely removed from the main house and forbidden to see the child she had borne. In the years following, the illusion was carefully maintained. Catherine performed the duties of a devoted mother by all standards valued in Charleston, society attentive but not indulgent, educational without pedantry, proud yet restrained. She clothed William in the finest garments, hired tutors in Latin and Greek, and ensured he learned to ride, shoot, and carry himself with the poise expected of a planter's son. Yet beneath this facade ran a constant undercurrent of anxiety. Catherine scrutinized William obsessively, searching his developing features for any hint of his true parentage, comparing him constantly to Nathaniel and her own family. William grew into a handsome, symmetrical child, his fair skin and light brown hair revealing no clear traces of mixed ancestry. In every way, he looked as he was meant to, the son of 2 prominent white families, inheriting wealth and status. Nathaniel seemed to bury the truth of William's origins deep in his consciousness, rarely acknowledging it even to himself. He treated the boy with genuine affection, teaching him estate management and cotton cultivation, and introducing him to Charleston's elite, preparing him to one day assume control of the plantation. If he ever felt guilt over William's conception, he displayed none. The enslaved community, however, remembered everything. Knowledge circulated quietly through glances and whispers. Older slaves knew Delilah had borne a child, now living as white in the main house. They watched her suffer under brutal labor, hands blistering and calloused from work, for which she had no preparation. Her previous refinement and education counted for nothing. Delilah endured her circumstances with numb resignation. Catherine had broken every promise of special treatment once the baby was secured. She was punished rather than rewarded, removed from the comfort of the house, and subjected to relentless field labor. She was forbidden from speaking of the child, or even looking toward the main house. Her father, the cooper, grew gaunt with worry and anger, understanding the injustice inflicted upon her, yet powerless to intervene. His only option was to slightly improve her conditions, providing a sturdier cabin, ensuring sufficient food, and protecting her from the overseer's worst impulses. As William grew from infant to young boy, the disparity between his life and his mother's became increasingly stark. He played in manicured gardens, while Delilah labored in the blistering sun among the cotton rows. He read leather-bound books, while she worked, under the threat of the whip for any perceived slowness. He was taught that enslaved people were inherently inferior, their suffering natural and unquestioned. Though the child and his birth mother existed in the same physical space, Catherine had ensured they lived in entirely separate worlds. This divide, engineered to be unbridgeable, exemplified the cruel logic upon which the plantation system itself was built, and Catherine had applied it to her desperate scheme. If this story fascinates and unsettles you, share your thoughts in the comments. Did anyone in Charleston suspect the truth? Let us know, and let's continue following William as he nears his 12th birthday. By 1856, William Rutled had developed into a boy who promised to grow into a respected young gentleman. At 11, he was tall for his age, sharp-witted, and carried the easy confidence of someone who had never been denied anything of consequence. He excelled academically, showing a particular talent for mathematics that pleased his father, and he displayed a quiet authority over the enslaved people around him, hinting that he might one day manage the plantation with efficiency and assurance. It was during that summer that the first cracks began to appear in Catherine's carefully crafted facade. William had taken to wandering the plantation in the early mornings, before the day's heat became unbearable, and before tutors arrived. He delighted in observing the workings of the estate, an enthusiasm Nathaniel interpreted as a sign that his son would be a hands-on manager, not a detached absentee landlord. One June morning, William followed the rhythmic hammering and rich scent of cut wood to the cooper's shop. Delilah's father, known simply as Isaac, was at work, shaping staves for the cotton barrels. Though in his 50s, his hands worn and gnarled from decades of labor, he still produced some of the finest cooperage in the Low Country. William had visited before, fascinated by the craft and Isaac's steady skill. The old man had always been courteous but distant, answering questions without elaboration, maintaining the proper boundary between enslaved and free. But that morning was different. William noticed Isaac glancing at him with an expression the boy couldn't read, something almost like pain. "Do you have children, Isaac?" William asked, his innocent curiosity unaware of the cruel realities enslaved people faced. Isaac paused, hands stilling on the wood. "I have a daughter," he finally said, voice carefully neutral. "Still do, I suppose. She works in the lower fields now." William asked why she didn't work in the house, recalling his mother's lessons that house slaves were better off than field hands. Isaac's jaw tightened slightly. "Your mother has her reasons for everything she does, Master William." There was an unspoken weight in the words, subtle yet piercing, lingering in the boy's mind. William wanted to probe further, but Isaac returned to work, ending the conversation. 2 weeks later, another discovery shattered William's world. Catherine had begun keeping a leather-bound journal, recording household accounts, social engagements, and personal thoughts. It was kept in a small, locked desk in her private sitting room, a space strictly off-limits to William. But on a humid afternoon, curiosity overcame him. The lock was simple, meant more for privacy than security. William, having observed his mother countless times, opened it easily. Most entries were mundane linen purchases, dinner invitations, notes on staffing. But then he found entries from 1844 and early 1845, written in Catherine's precise hand, but filled with anxiety absent from later pages. She wrote of physicians, treatments, and the fear of losing everything without an heir. On 1 August 1844 entry, her words made William read twice before comprehending, "I have conceived a solution to our desperate situation. It is bold, beyond anything I might have imagined myself capable of. And it requires Nathaniel's cooperation in an act society would condemn. But what choice do we have? I have identified a suitable candidate among the house servants, young, healthy, light enough that the result should pass scrutiny. If Nathaniel agrees, we could have our heir within the year, and no one need ever know the circumstances of the child's origin." William's hands shook as he turned the pages, only to find the next entries torn out. Months later, in April 1845, the journal resumed with a single line. "William Nathaniel Rutled was born today, the answer to all our prayers." The boy froze, journal in lap, unable to deny what the words implied. His mother had described a servant chosen to provide an heir in secrecy, a child whose origins were hidden. 11 years old enough to understand where babies come from, he could not ignore the implications. Returning the journal to the desk, hands numb, William wandered, the house like a ghost, past servants offering greetings he did not return. Outside, the blazing sun could not warm him, the weight of knowledge pressed like a stone inside him. For days, he moved through routines mechanically, distracted and disengaged. Catherine noticed his absence of focus, but blamed it on the summer heat. Nathaniel, preoccupied with political tensions rising between North and South, paid little attention. William began to watch his parents with new eyes, noting subtle unease in Catherine's glances and the performative pride in Nathaniel's gestures. He recalled Isaac's daughter laboring invisibly in the fields and wondered about the suitable candidate mentioned in the journal. Though he knew he should abandon the inquiry, curiosity at 11 proved irresistible. He observed enslaved women around the house, asked about former ladies' maids, and received only evasive answers. Their silence, however, only confirmed for William that something was being hidden. Through the network of whispers connecting the quarters to the house, Catherine soon learned of William's inquiries. That evening, she summoned him to the parlor, poised and composed. "I've been told you've been questioning the servants about household matters from years past," she said evenly. "May I ask what prompted this interest?" "I was just curious about how the plantation worked before I was born," he admitted. "Curiosity is admirable," she replied, when directed to appropriate subjects. "But private affairs of this household are not for interrogation. Questions about our family or history should come to your father or me. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," he said, though his voice faltered. Catherine studied him, as if reading his very thoughts. "You're growing up, William. With that comes responsibilities, including maintaining the dignity and privacy of our family. Some truths are not for discussion, not because they're shameful, because they are private. A gentleman learns to respect those boundaries." William understood. He would not pursue the answers, yet the warning only deepened his resolve. The stone of knowledge in his chest grew heavier, impossible to ignore. Just when the secret seemed safe, his curiosity threatened to uncover everything. Later, fate intervened. In late August, a fever swept the slave quarters, leaving many weak and delirious. Isaac, Delilah's father, was among the sickest. By the time the overseer informed Nathaniel, Isaac had been ill for nearly a week. Nathaniel sent for a physician, not out of compassion, but economic calculation. Dr. Reeves, a stout man responsible for both white and valuable enslaved patients, examined Isaac and pronounced his condition serious, though not necessarily fatal. The physician left medicine and instructions, then departed, leaving Isaac in Delilah's care. She had been granted permission to tend to her father during his illness, a small mercy, though really it was just practical necessity. Someone had to nurse him, and she was the obvious choice. She moved into his cabin, sleeping on the floor beside his bed, spooning water and thin broth into his mouth when he could swallow, bathing him with cool water when the fever raged. William had been watching from a distance, his curiosity about Isaac's daughter intensifying now that he knew she lived somewhere on the plantation. He had learned her name Delilah through casual questions he had tried to make sound innocent. He knew she was 22 when he was born, which made her 34 now. He knew she had once worked in the main house, but had been reassigned to fieldwork around the time of his birth. The pieces were all there, arranged in a pattern too glaring to ignore once one knew what to look for. On the third night of Isaac's illness, William lay restless, the heat pressing against his skin like wet cloth. He rose quietly, dressed, and slipped into the thick, August darkness. He told himself he was merely walking, seeking relief from the stifling air of his room. But his feet carried him toward the slave quarters, with a purpose he dared not name. The quarters were mostly still, everyone asleep after a long day of labor. A few cabins glimmered with candlelight, but most were dark. Isaac's cabin glowed faintly. William approached slowly, heart hammering. Voices drifted through the open window, a man's rasping breath, a woman's soft replies. He pressed against the rough exterior wall, listening. "You've got to promise me something," Isaac's voice rasped. "Promise?" "Anything, Papa," the woman answered, her tone familiar, slightly hoarse from years of calling across fields. "That boy, the one at the big house, you have to tell him the truth someday. Not now, Lord knows, not now. But someday, when he's old enough to understand and maybe do something with it. Promise me." There was a pause, then the woman's reply, trembling. "Papa, I can't. You know I can't. Mistress Catherine, what would she do?" Isaac's voice grew stronger despite his illness. "I know all of it. I saw what they did to you. Saw how they locked you away like some animal. Saw how they took that baby from your arms before you could even hold him. I saw how they threw you to the fields after, like you were nothing, like you hadn't given them everything. That boy deserves to know where he came from. And you deserve for him to know you're his mother, not the woman who stole him from you." William's legs shook. His world seemed to contract and stretch at once, his vision tunneling as his mind tried to reject what he was hearing. "Promise me, Lily," Isaac continued, using her childhood nickname. "Promise me you'll find a way when the time comes. I'm dying. Don't shake your head at me. We both know it's true, and I won't go to my grave knowing you carry this alone. Promise me." Delilah's voice broke, it on a sob. "I promise, Papa. I'll tell him someday, when it's safe." "It'll never be safe," Isaac said, a cruel wisdom in his words. "But maybe someday it will be possible. That's all I'm asking. Just possible." Outside the cabin, William stood frozen, every muscle rigid, breath shallow. The secret he had circled for months, the suspicion nurtured since reading his mother's journal, was now undeniable. Delilah, Isaac's daughter, The field hand he had scarcely noticed was his mother. She had carried him, birthed him, held him for a fleeting moment before Catherine tore him away. He thought of Catherine's padded belly, the cottage, the careful choreography that had kept him ignorant. And he realized how many must have known all the slaves, perhaps even some white neighbors, choosing silence over confronting such a profound violation of the racial order. Inside, Isaac's breathing labored, Delilah murmuring comfort, tears streaking her face. William knew he should leave, pretend this night had never happened. Let Isaac die without revealing the secret. But he could not move. Something stronger than self-preservation rooted him to the spot, listening to grief and illness echoing through the cabin's thin walls. Finally, William forced himself forward, trembling as he reached for the rough wooden door. He had no plan, no idea what to say, only an urgent need to see her, to confront the woman who had given him life and watched him grow up as someone else's son. The door creaked on opening, too loud in the quiet night. Delilah's head snapped up, tear-streaked face widening in shock and fear as she recognized him. For long moments, they simply stared the mother who had borne him, the boy who had been stolen, separated by 12 years and a chasm of circumstance. William saw her clearly for the first time. Thin, worn by years in the fields, hands calloused, clothes rough, homespun, but her face retained the refinement of education and house training. He saw himself in her features, the curve of her eyes, the line of her jaw, the crease of her forehead when she was distressed. "Is it true?" he whispered, voice cracking. "Are you my mother?" Delilah's expressions flickered shock, fear, resignation, grief. She glanced at Isaac, then back at him. Denial was possible, but futile and cruel. Finally, she whispered, "Yes, I am." The world tilted. William clutched the doorframe, knuckles white, feeling as though he were falling despite standing firmly. "Tell me," he demanded, voice both plea and command. "Tell me everything. I need to understand." Delilah sought Isaac's guidance, who nodded faintly. "Come inside. Close the door. This isn't a story for the open air." William stepped in, door shutting behind him. The cabin was tiny, smelling of sickness, sweat, and herbs. A single candle cast long, unreal shadows. He sank into a chair while Delilah stood, arms wrapped around herself. Then she began to speak. She told him of Catherine's desperation, of the failed treatments, of her own summons to the sitting room, told she had been chosen to secure the Rutled family's future. She told him how she had struggled to understand what Catherine proposed, and how realization struck like a physical blow. "I was 22, she said, voice flat yet resonant. "Educated to read and write, trained for the house. I thought that made me valuable. I thought it meant I'd always serve in comfort, but it just made me useful in a different way." She described Nathaniel's 3 nights, his cold efficiency, the way he never looked at her, never acknowledged her humanity. William felt bile rise as he grasped the full horror of his conception. This was not history, it was his origin. Delilah spoke of isolation, months of being hidden, while Catherine paraded her padded belly through Charleston. She described talking to him in the womb, singing songs, telling stories, promising love she knew she could not give. "I used to talk to you," she whispered, tears streaming. "I'd make promises about all the love I'd give you. I knew they were lies. But you were real to me in a way you could never be to Mistress Catherine." She described the birth, hours of labor, Catherine pacing in the next room, the moment William emerged. "They let me hold you for maybe 2 minutes," she said. "Mistress Catherine took you before I could even look at you. You were crying, hungry, and I heard you as they carried you away. Then, nothing. I thought I would die." Her voice broke, raw, and full of grief. William sat in stunned silence, finally understanding everything: the theft of his infancy, the cruelty, and the love that had silently shaped his earliest existence. Then she had been returned to the main house, briefly assigned as William's wet nurse, in an act of cruelty so precise it seemed designed to maximize her suffering. "I fed you for 3 months, Delilah said, softly. "I held you, gave you my milk, looked at your face, and couldn't speak of what you meant to me. I sang to you while you nursed the same songs I had sung when you were still inside me. I don't know if you remember. I hope you don't. It would hurt too much if you did." Then came the abrupt reassignment to the fields, a brutal transition from house slave to the hardest labor the plantation offered. Delilah was 23, educated, trained in the refined work of a lady's maid, and suddenly she was expected to pick cotton from dawn to dusk, hands blistering and bleeding as she learned tasks for which she had never been prepared. "Why?" William asked, his voice breaking for the first time since she had begun her story. "Why did they treat you like that if you'd already given them what they wanted?" "Because I was dangerous," Delilah said simply. "Every time I looked at you, every time I was near you, there was a risk someone would see something in my face, a tenderness, a claim that could give away the truth. Mistress Catherine couldn't risk that. She sent me away so I couldn't see you, couldn't reveal anything by accident, and made sure everyone understood that if I ever spoke about what had happened, tried to claim you, or told you the truth, I would be sold away, or worse." William thought of all the times he had walked past the field hands without noticing them as individuals. His mother could have been among them, watching him grow from a distance, forbidden from acknowledging him, speaking to him, or claiming any connection to the child she had borne. "Have you," he began, swallowing against the tightness in his throat, "been watching me all these years?" Delilah nodded slowly. "Every chance I got. When the field hands returned from work, I looked for you in the windows of the big house. Sundays, at church, I watched you in the white section with your parents and the Rutleds. I memorized your face at every age. I watched you learn to walk, to ride, to carry yourself like a young master. I watched you become someone I could never reach, could never claim, could never call son, and it hurt me a little more every single day." William's tears began to fall unbidden, streaming down his face as he confronted the full weight of her pain and the enormity of what had been done to both of them. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I didn't know. I don't know what I should have done, but I'm sorry." Delilah crossed the small space and knelt before him, taking his hands in hers. Her hands were rough, scarred by years of labor, but her grip was gentle. "You were a child," she said firmly. "You are a child. None of this is your fault. You didn't choose how you came into this world. You didn't choose to be raised as white. You didn't choose any of it." "What am I?" William asked desperately. "What am I supposed to be? If you're my mother?" He could not say the word that would name his reality under South Carolina's laws and customs. "You're my son," Delilah said, squeezing his hands. "That's all that matters to me. You're my son, and I have loved you every day of your life." Even when I couldn't say it, even when I couldn't show it, even when you didn't know I existed, I have loved you with everything I am." Behind them, Isaac made a sound, half cough, half sob. "That's right, boy," the old man rasped. "You're my grandson. Got my mother's eyes, Gula from down on the islands. You've got her way of seeing things, like you notice more than what's right in front of you." William turned to Isaac, seeing him anew. This dying man was his grandfather, more truly family than Catherine or Nathaniel had ever been. "Does everyone know?" William asked, looking back to Delilah. "All the slaves? Do they know who I really am?" "Yes," Delilah said quietly. "They've always been known. Secrets like this don't stay secret among us. We see everything, hear everything, but no one would ever speak of it to the white folks. That would be signing their death warrant." William felt the weight of it settle on him. Dozens, maybe hundreds, walking around with the truth of his origins, forced into silence by circumstance. Every "yes, Master William," and "no, Master William" he had received was filtered through people who knew he was actually one of them, stolen and raised as something he was not. "What do I do now?" he asked. The question hung like smoke. "How am I supposed to? I can't pretend. I can't go back, but I don't know what else to do." Delilah's face betrayed the struggle within her. She wanted to tell him to claim his true identity, to reject the lie of his whiteness, to acknowledge her as his mother. But she also understood the danger. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "I've imagined this moment for 12 years, 1,000 different ways, but I never knew what I'd say. The world you live in and the world I live in, they're not meant to overlap. You crossing that line wouldn't make you free, it would just make you enslaved like me. I can't wish that on you, no matter how much I want to claim you." "But you are claiming me," William said. "Right now. You're telling me the truth. That means something. It means I'm selfish," Delilah said, a faint, sad smile tugging at her lips. "Weak enough to want you to know where you came from, even if it only brings pain." They sat in silence, the weight of the revelation pressing down. Outside, a rooster crowed prematurely, heralding the coming dawn. Soon, William would have to return to the main house, and the moment with his mother would end. "Can I?" he began, hesitating. "Come back to see you again?" Delilah's eyes reflected the tension between desire and caution. "It's dangerous," she said. "I don't care," William said, surprising himself with the conviction. "You're my mother. I want to know you." "Then come," she said softly. "When you can, when it's safe. But be careful. The consequences of this truth coming out could be terrible for both of us." He nodded, understanding, and rose unsteadily. Before leaving, he turned back. "Thank you for telling me, for not lying, even though it would have been safer." "You deserved the truth," Delilah said. "Always." William stepped into the pre-dawn darkness, mind reeling. The boy who had left the house the night before was gone. The person who returned knew the truth of his origins, and with that knowledge came choices, consequences, and the burden of a new identity. In the days that followed, he moved through the plantation like an actor, performing the role of dutiful son and future planter while wrestling with everything he had learned. Isaac died 3 days later, his weakened body succumbing to the fever. Delilah was given only hours to prepare his body before being sent back to the fields. William watched the funeral from a distance, mourning privately, not just for Isaac, But for all the stolen connections and relationships, Catherine's deception had denied him. Meanwhile, Catherine noticed the change in her son. One afternoon, she cornered him in the library. "William, I need honesty. Something has changed. What troubles you?" He looked at her, the woman who had raised him, taught him, comforted him, and claimed him as her own. Love, yes, but also betrayal, anger, and a profound sense of violation. "I've been thinking about Isaac," he said, the truth only partly spoken. "That's very sensitive," Catherine replied, relief carefully controlled. "It's good you have compassion, but don't let it trouble you. Death is part of life." Isaac lived a long, useful existence. William felt bile rise but kept his face neutral, nodding. "You're right," he said, watching her relax. "Good boy," she said, touching his cheek. "I know you have a tender heart, but you must learn proper distance. They don't feel things as we do." He wanted to scream. "They do. She is my mother." But he said nothing, nodding. In the mornings and evenings, when the plantation was quiet, William sought Delilah. Their meetings were brief, shadowed, secret. She taught him about her life before his birth, the realities of the slave quarters, and the networks of resistance the enslaved had built. She revealed the truths no white child was meant to know, sharing stolen moments of joy, whispered dreams of freedom, and the endurance that had sustained them all. Delilah taught William that the people he had been raised to see as property were in fact fully human, intelligent, emotional, and deserving of dignity, just as anyone in Charleston society. She taught him about himself, too, the blood in his veins, the heritage Catherine had tried so hard to erase. "Your great-grandmother was brought from Africa," Delilah told him one night, her voice heavy with memory. "My grandmother spoke a language none of us ever learned. She sang songs we couldn't understand. My father said she never forgot her homeland, always telling stories of the village she was stolen from. That's your blood too, William. Not just the white planter families Mistress Catherine brags about. You carry Africa in you, whether the world recognizes it or not." These revelations were both painful and liberating. William began to understand that identity was not only what others told you it was what you knew yourself to be, what you chose to acknowledge, what you refused to deny, even when denial would be easier. Yet knowing the truth and acting on it were entirely different matters. He was still legally white, the recognized heir to the Rutled Plantation, expected to occupy a place among Charleston's elite. Delilah was still enslaved, vulnerable to sale, punishment, or death at the whim of the very people he called parents. As his 12th birthday approached, William wrestled with an impossible question. What was he to do with the knowledge of his true origins? For a moment, he imagined exposing the truth publicly, standing in church, at a social gathering, declaring that he was the son of an enslaved woman, that his entire identity was a lie constructed by his mother's desperation and his father's complicity. But he knew it would achieve nothing except his own ruin. He would be declared enslaved, his property seized, and he would be sold or forced to remain a slave on the plantation. Delilah would likely be punished or sold, and Catherine and Nathaniel would simply invent a new story, declare him mad, and protect themselves. The truth William realized with bitter clarity, had no power in a world built on lies. He considered escape, fleeing north to a place where slavery was illegal, where he might live openly as a person of mixed race. But he was 12, without money, without knowledge of survival beyond the plantation, and fleeing would mean abandoning Delilah to whatever retribution Catherine might impose. So William did what countless others in impossible circumstances had done. He adapted. He learned to live with cognitive dissonance, to hold two truths at once without letting them paralyze him. Outwardly, he was William Rutled, son of Nathaniel and Catherine, heir to a cotton plantation, member of Charleston's elite. That was the identity the world recognized and that protected him from enslavement. Privately, he was William, son of Delilah, grandson of Isaac, bearer of African and European blood, a living contradiction of the very system that claimed to define him. Both truths were real, both identities his, and the tension between them shaped every decision he would make. As he grew, William maintained a secret relationship with Delilah, meeting her whenever he could. She taught him about life before his birth, the realities of the enslaved community, and the subtle networks of resistance that allowed them to survive. When he went to college in Charleston, he wrote her letters, smuggled through trusted intermediaries. On returning to manage the plantation, he used his position to make her life more bearable, easier work, adequate food, and protection from overseers, but never publicly acknowledged her as his mother. He married a white woman, raised children as white, perpetuating the same lies and silences that had shaped his upbringing. He convinced himself it was practical, that rebellion would accomplish nothing but destruction for both him and Delilah. Yet in private, in the dark hours before dawn, he knew the truth. He had chosen comfort over justice, security over truth, complicity over confrontation. Delilah never blamed him. She had learned long ago that survival meant accepting what could not be changed and cherishing small mercies. The fact that her son knew her, visited her, called her mother in private, gave her a measure of peace most enslaved mothers never experienced. She died in 1871 at 49, her body worn by decades of labor and trauma. William, 38, attended her funeral from a distance, not as her son publicly, but silently mourning what he had been allowed to know and what he had been forced to hide. After the other white observers left, he stayed by her grave, letting himself cry for the first time since he was 11, for Delilah, for Isaac, for the fragments of connection that had been stolen from him, and for the children who would never know their grandmother. In his will, filed after his death in 1892, William left a small bequest to Isaac's descendants, a veiled acknowledgement of the truth no one in his white family would understand. His children never learned their real heritage. His grandchildren grew up secure in whiteness, oblivious to the woman who had borne their father. The story of Delilah and her stolen child faded into the unmarked corners of plantation history. Yet, traces of truth endured in family genealogies, in whispered stories, in the DNA that carries memory forward, even when official records are scrubbed clean. William Rutled lived and died as a white man, his obituary praising his service, family devotion, and skill as a planter, never mentioning where he truly came from, or the mother who loved him from afar. That silence itself became a monument, a testament to the power of lies sanctioned by law and custom. The Rutled Plantation stands today as a historic site, its grand house preserved, its gardens maintained. Tourists learn of antebellum elegance, the cotton economy, and the family's legacy, yet nothing is said of Delilah, her stolen child, the 12 years of secrecy, or the lifetime of quiet grief that followed. Some truths are too uncomfortable for history, too damaging for the myths society tells itself. They fade from records, but remain real, persistent, a reminder of cruelty facilitated by systems of power and sustained through silence. William Rutled's story, born into a lie, living inside it, never escaping it, is in many ways the story of America itself, a nation built on theft, maintained through complicity, and haunted by the truths it refuses to face.